Today's panel is going to be the impact of advocacy and how we're utilizing the shifting dynamics of public opinion of Palestine in the U.S. here. So this is like local grassroots organizing all the way up to like the federal organizing, as well as other modes of like media, and just really how like we're utilizing the shift in perspective on Palestine and Israel to our advantage here in this movement. Today I have an amazing panel of speakers and activists, and I will start off with Dr. Osama Abuirshaid, who is our Executive Director of American Muslims for Palestine and AJP, mashallah alayh. I have Jinan Chehade right next to him, who is a civil rights attorney with Muslim Legal Fund of America, and she's also founder and co-chair of SJP Chicago and Law Students for Justice in Palestine at Georgetown Law. And then I also have the lovely Ayah Ziyadeh, who is the former advocacy director of AMP and AJP. So I think give them all a round of applause. Wallah, they all deserve it. They do so much work. So I kind of just wanted to open up the panel today and ask a general question about what you guys all think about the noticeable shift in public opinion that there has been regarding Palestine in recent months. How do you think this has contributed to the current moment we are in regards to the Palestinian movement? And also, how do you think that this shift in public sentiment comes? How it has influenced U.S. foreign policy on Palestine?
Start with me? Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's great to be here. Being the advocacy director for AMP and AGP Action, I have been, obviously, my full-time job was advocacy, and I got to see the drastic shift that occurred following October 7th, and it was pretty drastic. And the thing is, there was a lot that was happening behind closed doors that wasn't also public. So there's two sides to it, which is the shift in American public opinion, so Americans shifting in their support for Palestine, and then there was elected officials kind of disconnecting from the status quo, which was incredible to see, because as we all know, the United States is Israel's best friend. And the majority of elected officials, as they get elected into office, have to pledge to the Zionist lobby, making them also Israel's best friend. And so following October 7th, the halls of Congress in particular, where all U.S. foreign policy exists, was in shambles. People did not, the elected officials themselves and their offices did not know how to function at all. Everybody was not prepared to respond, minus, staunch Zionists, because there's a drastic difference between being a staunch Zionist elected official and being one that just, takes AIPAC's talking points. So the people that were in the middle were trying to differentiate or disconnect from that in the best way possible, and a lot of them found themselves hitting walls because they had no idea how to. They, for the first time ever, were getting over 80% of their calls and emails and office visits were from pro-Palestinian constituents and our allies. For the first time in history, this was incredible. Their phones were ringing nonstop. Their offices were being knocked on nonstop. Their emails were all about Palestine, Gaza, 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 Gaza. And they literally, a lot of staffers told me, they were forced to face it. They were forced to have these conversations in their offices for the first time. And so this shift happened in two parts, obviously, and they both complement one another. Because of the shift in American public opinion, there was a drastic shift within the halls of power. And now polling data has shown that 52% of young Americans believe that the U.S. should stop providing unconditional aid to Israel. And 61% of Democrats favor imposing conditions on aid to ensure compliance with human rights standards. And these data points represent the drastic shift that has occurred over the last year. And inshallah, it'll continue shifting.
Thank you so much, Ayah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Yeah, please give her a round of applause. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Jinan Chehade. As Jenin mentioned, it's an honor to be here with all of you. I am an AMP conference born and raised. I don't know what Thanksgiving is because every single one of my Thanksgivings were spent in this very hall, learning from everyone, growing together for Palestine. And when we talk about this narrative shift, I think it's really important first for us to discuss why the narrative shift in the US is crucial to when talking about Palestine and liberated Palestine. Because we have to start changing our language here, and I want you all to stay with me. For the past year and a half, we've been saying, oh, this is an Israeli genocide with US-backed bombs, right? That's the language that we've been using. But I need us to change our language first, because the US is not just aiding in this genocide, the US is an equal partner in this genocide. Almost $18 billion since October has been given to Israel to commit this genocide that we see on our screens every single day. Just yesterday, Biden announced $680 million in weapons transfer to Israel. The US has vetoed a ceasefire 4 times. The only country in the Security Council to veto a ceasefire 4 times, the most recent of which was a week and a half ago. It's used its veto power 49 times to stop sanctions against Israel. Each one of you that is sitting here today, you have given hundreds of dollars to Israel. There's a statistic that came out that said the average tax-paying American gives $50 a day to Israel. So I want you to really think about that, because when we say these numbers and when we see it on our screen, it's easy to disassociate. But as hard as it is to accept, every one of the 355 bullets that pierced Hind Ragab's body, the bomb that killed Reem Ruh al-Ruh, every single aid package that has been blocked, every airstrike, every bomb has been with your taxpayer dollars. If you are waiting for the US and Israel to call for a ceasefire, you are fooling yourself. When Israel assassinated the political head negotiator, Ismail Haniyeh, has proved that it is not interested in bilateral negotiations. So what does this mean for us? The only way that a ceasefire will happen, the only way that a genocide against Gaza will stop, is if it stops right here, right? Is if we change this public narrative, is if we put enough pressure on our politicians to place an embargo on Israel. We, as people who profit off the comfort American imperialism has offered us, we as people whose tax dollars are being used to facilitate this genocide, we have a duty to be on the front lines of this cause. If you are waiting for Israel to announce a ceasefire, it's not going to come. It's going to happen right here, in this very room, in these streets. That is why when we talk about this narrative, when we talk about advocacy in the US, it is crucial, because we live in the belly of the beast. The only way this ceasefire will come is if we put enough pressure for an arms embargo. So keep that in mind as we're talking about today. When talking again about this narrative shift, there's 2 wars that are happening. Okay? There's a physical war in Gaza, right? This physical war. And there's also the war of consciousness that's happening in the US. And the Zionist entity has unleashed all its weapons in this war on consciousness against students, in media, against employers, and politicians. Billions and billions of dollars. But we have people power, right? That is our power. Everyone in this room, we do not have the billions that they have. We do not have politicians on our side, but we do have people power. We do have advocacy. And it's come to the point that, subhanAllah, we are at day 417. Day 417 of this genocide. But I want you to shift the narrative of, yes, we are seeing the worst documented genocide in our modern day history. Every day is worse than the day before with the images we are seeing. But we are also seeing decolonization happen in real time. Frantz Fanon, he wrote about the Algerian Revolution and their liberation from France, and he said, the Algerian people were not able to achieve liberation until they freed themselves from all the mental sedimentation and colonial handicaps that came from colonization. They stripped themselves of all of that. Does that sound familiar? That awakening? And that is what's happening with this narrative shift. Of now, there used to be a time when decades, nothing would happen in decades. We're in the weeks when decades happen in weeks. Years are happening in days. There was a leaked recording from the Anthony Greenwald. He's the leader of the Anti-Defamation League. In a leaked recording, he said, we have a huge generational problem, right? A huge generational problem. Because the support for Palestine is no longer limited to a certain background, a certain identity, a certain field, a certain generation. It is everywhere. We are winning this war of consciousness because you cannot hide the truth. When we see these statistics, we know it is real because even everywhere you go, there are people that are wearing hattas in the streets, right? We are winning this war of consciousness. There is this narrative shift. Yes, Israel is unleashing unprecedented violence, but it's because this is the beginning of the end for this occupation. We have reached the beginning of the end, and it is collapsing with every passing day.
ليس بعد قولها قول. That's what she meant by it. You can't say anything after Jinan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So usually I don't feel intimidated by any other speakers, but today I do feel intimidated. MashaAllah. Jannah or Jenin, Ayah, Jinan, MashaAllah. The generation that is leading the change and that is leading our way forward, inshallah, in this country. And as Ayah and Jannah just explained, that we're witnessing a generational transformation. And we have statistics to prove it. I'm not talking about the same statistics that they use in polling to predict who's going to win the presidency, because we've seen how it worked out in 2016 and in 2024. We had Trump twice because of the pollings that, mashallah, is so superb and so good and so meticulous, unless you believe that the Russians did interfere. I don't know. Robert Mueller says he couldn't understand the relationship between Trump and Russia until today. So anyway, let us go back to the shift in narrative here in America. It might look awkward to all of us that we're talking about a shift in America in relation to Palestine, while we're witnessing also this complete, full complicity, partnership of the United States in the genocide that is taking place in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, and the instability that Israel is causing in the entire region. So many will question the logic. How are we talking about a shift while we continue to see that America and the decision makers are doubling down in their support of Israel? Let me tell you what is happening here. Let us go pre-October 7th, 2023. There was a public opinion poll by Gallup on March 16, 2023. If you want to Google it, go ahead. March 16, 2023 by Gallup. That found that Israel's favorability fell to 54%. The sympathy with Palestinians, and I'm talking about the general public opinion. I'm not talking about Democrats, progressives, younger Americans. I'm talking about the general tendencies in relation to Israel/Palestine. So Israel's favorability fell down to 54%. The sympathy with Palestinians risen to 31%. This was pre-October 7th, 2023. Now, what this indicates is that there is a constant decline in Israel's favorability in America. The other side is noticing, by the way. Now comes October 7, there was a spike in terms of sympathy with Israel, but this spike didn't stay for too long. Because in December 2023, Quinnipiac University conducted another poll that found Israel's favorability declined or fell to 49%. Again, I'm talking about the general public. Still, a majority of Americans are more sympathetic with Israel, but it is not the levels that it enjoyed a decade ago, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, until to 7 decades ago. So there is this steady decline. Now, what is driving this decline? It's not only the ideological affiliations or lines that separate certain sects and certain trends in America. It's not only the progressives or Democrats, it's also generational. Younger Americans are more sympathetic with the Palestinian people. Those who are under 30 are by far more supportive of the Palestinian people. Those who are under 30 are by far oppose the U.S. arming Israel and the U.S. complicity with Israel. Only 5% of those who identify as democratic student base support Israel. So if you look at the numbers, you will see that it's driven by the generation of Jenin, Ayah, Jannah, and Jinan. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm 51 years old now. Yeah, you have to give me a pass on this. So it's driven by this generation, by the generation of our children. It's driven by the generation of our children. And if you look at their generation, you will find that this is the generation that led social justice movements in America, led change historically. Let us go back to the 60s and 70s. When Johnson was a president, when the US was implicated in another unjustified war in Vietnam, Johnson made it a mission of his to quash the student movement, the anti-Vietnam war, the anti-Vietnam war movement. He militarized our campuses. He deployed the FBI, the CIA, the National Guards to quash this movement. Nixon ran on a platform with a promise that he's going to bring this movement to an end. 4 students were killed in 1970 in Kent State University in Ohio. This movement at the time did not enjoy the support of the overwhelming majority of Americans. Still, this movement changed the public opinion in America and was able to defeat not only Johnson, but to compel Nixon to be the president who decided to withdraw from Vietnam. So now let me tell you this, I will conclude with this. You know, our opponents have had a grip over the past. Their grip today is being weakened in the present. And their grip tomorrow will be entirely diminished in the future. They know that this is the generation that is going to change things for them, and therefore they're no longer interested in winning their hearts and minds. They want to stab their hearts and minds. But they will fail as they failed in the 1960s and in the 1970s, and as they failed in the 1980s in relation to the apartheid regime in South Africa, and they will continue to fail because we will continue to maintain our resilience and we will continue to fight for what is just. Now that's why they're trying to legislate new laws to shut down our organizations, to go after students, to expel them, to deport them, to throw people in jail under vague and under frivolous lawsuits, because they know they no longer can control the narrative. The only way left for them is to try to suppress. But every force in America that tried to suppress was always defeated, and ask the McCarthyism era.
Thank you so much, guys. Those were all amazing, amazing answers. And I think definitely the shift in public opinion is a gradual thing, and I think we're definitely at its peak, and we can use it to our advantage in our movement, which is why I want to ask this specific question to Jinan right now, which is, how can we utilize this shift and this like momentum in different modes of advocacy. So think about civic engagement, protest, education, media, all those kinds of things.
All right, big question. But first, I want to start off by asking, can you raise your hand if you would consider yourself an activist? Raise your hand. All right, good amount of hands. But inshallah, by the end of this answer, I hope that everybody's hands will be raised. And I think we need to reevaluate what this word activist means to us, right? Because I think for a long time we thought the activist was, the person in the protest chanting. But really, in this moment, we cannot afford to be passive about our condition. We cannot we cannot reserve activism to a select few, right? We have to break down what this idea means and rebuild it. Because in this moment, day 417, Gaza demands that every person must be activated. I'm going to say that again. Every person must be activated. And this is not in the way of, start going to protests, which yes, I will get to that. But every person must be activated in a way that is very specific to you. People come to me all the time and ask, what should I do, Jinan? Where should I go? Everybody's advocacy and your activism looks very different. It is multifaceted. It depends on your skills, your space around you, your resources, your tools. It is up to you to use all these resources, all these tools to advocate for Palestine. We can no longer separate our lives for Palestine and our daily 9-to-5 jobs, right? That this struggle must manifest every aspect of our lives. Every aspect of our lives. And we saw this even in the first Intifada, right? In the first Intifada, this was also 6 years of an extremely violent time for the Palestinians. But there's a lot to learn from this time. Over 600,000 homes were destroyed. Thousands of people imprisoned. Thousands of people killed, similar to this time. But in this time of despair, the Palestinians came together and began to organize, to mobilize. They created labor unions. They created mothers' clubs, fathers' clubs, cultural events for children. They mobilized the entire community that every person must be activated. Every person. So your role as a mother, your role as a teacher, your role as a lawyer cannot be separated from your role for Palestine. Instead, they're mutually exclusive. They complement one another. We have to ask ourselves, are we awake? Are we going through life? Are we living just to work? Or do we live with purpose? Right? Do we live for liberation and the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And subhanAllah, like the people of Gaza teach us this. Rifat al-Arir, Allah yarhamun, he was a friend to a lot of people in this room. He was a friend to me. He would come to Chicago all the time. Rifat al-Arir, that was assassinated exactly almost 1 year ago today by the Israeli entity. He was a writer. He was a very well-known writer, an English teacher. He said, when Israel was closing in on his home, was bombing houses next to him. He said, I have no weapons, but if Israel enters my home, I will throw at them a marker. I will throw at them a pen. I will use whatever I have. His power was his pen. And he fought with his pen until his dying breath. One of his last tweets, he said, if I die, know that the DNC and Biden is responsible for my death. So how are we using? What is your weapon? What is your tool? Ask yourself, are you a thorn on the side of your enemy? And it's something that we all have to realize. We are 417 days in. And some of us are still debating if we should speak up. So this time requires deep introspection of how we are activating ourselves. The next thing I wanted to get to is this war of consciousness and how advocacy is our tool in this war of consciousness. We shift the narrative, again, by shifting the people. We shift the narrative by shifting the people. So many of you know me as someone that's always in the protests every Saturday. Guys, we have a protest tomorrow. If you want to come out tomorrow morning. But honestly, when these protests and when we do these direct actions, people think that it's just, these kids, these students, these youth are just in the street angry. There is a very strategic reason we are doing these protests. There's a very strategic reason we haven't given up. There's a very strategic reason we continue with this direct actions. Because our role, we know right now, is to make it an inconvenience for this system to ignore our demands by disrupting everything. Because the only thing this country listens to is what? Money, right? Money. So we will make it an inconvenience for this system to ignore our demands by disrupting everything. When we disrupt the streets, when we disrupt the highways, right? When we protest outside of weapon manufacturers, when we change this narrative, we are changing in order to make it an inconvenience. We are weaponizing this chaos. And this is something Martin Luther King said in his letter from Birmingham jail. He said, "Well, many ask me, why direct action? Why sit-ins? Why marches? Why so forth? Is it negotiating a better path?" And we hear this all the time. Don't you want to come sit at the table? Why are you so mad? Why are you so angry? Martin Luther King, to this, he says, "You are right in calling for a negotiation indeed. This is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is confronted with this issue. I remember when Tammy Duckworth, she came to our masjid here in Bridgeview, right? And she came after Wadi' al-Fayyumi's death. And I told her, don't come to our masjid while you're voting. I told her to her face, do not come to our masjid while you just sent $2 billion to Israel. Do not come to our masjid while you are responsible for this rhetoric that killed Wadi' al-Fayyumi. And she said to my face, she said, as long as I am in office, I will continue to send weapons to Israel. I will continue to aid money to Israel. So to this, and I tell her, every protest, expect us everywhere. Expect us everywhere. Expect us in the streets, in the highways, in law, in media. Because we will make Palestine unavoidable. So your cowardice is staring right at your face. So we can change this narrative. And I think Dr. Osama said this beautifully. When we talk about this, this is not us coming up with these ideas. Historically, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the way they were able to create change, the way they were able to stop the Vietnam War, to create these civil rights laws that we profit off of is by this activism, is by this advocacy, through sit-in, through marches. These encampments that we saw, they started with the Vietnam movement. So we have seen, again, that this activism is successful. And the last thing I want to get to before passing it on is protests, direct actions. They're important, but we also have to be strategic about them. So do not wait for somebody to activate you. Activate yourself and ask these three questions. Who is your target? Right? Who is your target? Know everything about them. Right? Are you in proximity? Is the company you work for, are they invested in Israel? Do you have a weapons manufacturer in your city? Right? Your politicians, have they voted for genocide? So who is your target? What is your demands and asks and goals from them? What tools are you utilizing to get there? And be creative, right? Sometimes protesting works. Sometimes direct actions works. Sometimes connecting to labor unions. Sometimes boycotting. Create new tactics to adjust to these times. And sorry, the last thing I want to add to this, because people always ask me this question of what is the point, right? We're 417 days in Jinan, these protests aren't working, these direct actions aren't working, Gaza is just as bad. And to this question, first, I think the first thing that we want to ask ourselves is, anybody was to ask these questions, it is the people of Gaza. I think about the people who clean the hospital, right? That they clean the hospital just for more patients to come in. The doctors, they stitch somebody up just to send them away and them to come again with an arm or a leg lost. I think about the civil aid workers in Gaza. Just 1 week ago, I saw a video, wallahi, of 6 civil aid workers in northern Gaza that spent 8 hours trying to dig out a 12-year-old girl, Ghazal. 8 hours from under the rubble after an Israeli airstrike. They were entertaining her, trying to make her smile as they were digging her out. They finally got her out, and wallahi, the joy, the smile on their faces speaks for itself. But then they found out 2 hours later that she had died. She had died from internal wounds as a result of the heaviness of the rubble that was on her. If anybody was to ask, what is the point? It is them. But just an hour later, those same civil aid workers went to dig out another child from under the rubble. They teach us what resilience. And subhanAllah, this ayah comes to mind where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ إِنَّ لَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرًا إِلَّا مَنْ أَحْسَنَ عَمَلًا. Whoever is God conscious, is patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not let their efforts go to waste. So do not ask about the result. Activate yourself, do, and leave the rest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even with that, we are seeing wins like never before. Right now, what we're doing is putting cracks in the system, right? We're putting cracks in this colonial entity, and one day that dam will burst. And the occupation will come falling down. And we are seeing this now, this decolonization. To give you a few examples, we are seeing the physical decolonization of Israel. 500,000 settlers have left Israel. Over 50,000 businesses have shut down in Israel. We are seeing the fruits of our effort in real time right here in Chicago. Many of you have saw the video of me. For the first 6 months of the genocide, I was being dragged out of City Hall every week. Every week we would go to the City Hall meetings, disrupt. Every week telling them to call for a ceasefire. And alhamdulillah, Chicago is the largest city in the United States to call for a ceasefire. Dick Durbin is one of the only senators, Dick Durbin, the senator of Illinois, is one of the only senators in the United States that voted for an arms embargo against Israel. And I can't tell you how many times we're outside of Dick Durbin's house protesting, right? Biden losing, the DNC losing this election is a direct result of the pressure that the Palestinian movement has put on the DNC party. A direct result. We have shifted the narrative. We are literally controlling the political scheme in the United States. Starbucks has lost $11 billion. McDonald's stock has plummeted. Sabra has been forced to sell their shares just last week. And we are seeing the decolonization in our mind in real time. We are creating these, connecting the dots. There are kids in Gaza that we're giving to Lebanon. Imagine. There were people in Lebanon that were housing people from all over Lebanon. We are decolonizing all these areas that we have put up in our head. We have seen that the same people, the arm, CPD, all these police stations arm Israel. We are decolonizing our minds, and at the same time, we are winning. So the last thing I'll say about this is that we are facing, again, an unprecedented time. An unprecedented time where weeks are happening in decades. But we must ask ourselves, are we going to crumble or are we going to rise to the occasion? Are we going to fall into despair? Or are we going to find power in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because the promise of a free Palestine, wallahi, is as real as me and you sitting right here. As real as me and you sitting right here. It's coming. But when we are brought on the day of judgment in front of Rim Ruh al-Ruh, when we are brought in front of Hind Rajab and Ismail al-Ghul, when they ask us what we have done for Palestine, are you going to lower your head in shame? Or are you going to raise your head and give them a direct answer? That is what we must ask ourselves.
Thank you so much, Jinan. I think it's always really important to understand that this will not happen in a day, but it's always important to ground ourselves and realize why we're doing this, and also that there are levels to what we're doing. So obviously, like Jinan mentioned, there's direct actions, there's protesting, but she also mentioned things like talking to elected officials. And this is why I have this specific question for Ayah. In terms of influencing local officials, what do you think are some specific steps or strategies that we can take to work in tandem with things like protests and direct actions that can be employed at the grassroots level to raise awareness for Palestine?
So when I started doing this work, I was 16 years old, and I started on the political side. I was more so an activist. I'm still an activist, but every weekend I was screaming, I was writing poetry, I was leading protests. That's how I started out. I had nothing to do with policy or advocacy work. In fact, if 16-year-old Ayah were to see me today, she'd be like, what the hell are you doing? But this is the thing, is every method of, I have to be cautious of the language that I use. Every method, everything that we do to combat the occupation is important, and it all complements each other. So speaking to our elected officials complements the protests. Boycotting complements everything, because you got to hit them where it hurts the most, and that's money, right? Like I said earlier, internally and externally, Congress is imploding, okay? What we've done here that also 16-year-old Ayah would not believe is we made Palestine an American issue. When I first entered the adulthood workforce, I was working at the Colorado State Legislature, and I was the only Palestinian there before Representative Iman Judah was elected. I was working actually for a Jewish representative who's an amazing ally, and he was the chair of judiciary, and me being the person that I am, I would implement Palestine wherever in every conversation that I was having. And a lot of times when I talk to people, this was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I would talk to people about this in the policy space, they would say, well, why would we care about it here? Or why would we talk about it when it's a foreign policy issue? It has nothing to do with Colorado. It has nothing to do with America. But every single year, I would sit and they would talk about what? They would talk about the Holocaust, right? Technically, what does the Holocaust have to do with the United States? It was horrible, but is it an American issue, technically speaking? No. So that just spoke to our dehumanization, the dehumanization of Palestinians. What we've done in this past year is we made Palestine an American issue. There is no saying, oh, it's a foreign policy issue, we can't do anything about it. It's an American issue that everybody needs to face. And honestly, everybody has begun, because it's interconnected to everything here. The oppression of Palestinians is creating a ripple effect and harming Americans here on the ground. And that's exactly why the Democratic Party not only lost this election, but they've combusted. There is no such thing as a Democratic Party as it existed this past campaign. It has ceased to exist for what it is. And if the Democratic Party wants to move forward as a Democratic Party, they have to do some serious soul searching and introspection. Because the reason that Trump won is because of Palestine, and like Jinan said, our movement placed so much pressure on the Democratic Party and made it impossible for them to ignore it. In the past, they were able to win our support, like Biden. In 2020, a lot of us voted for him, not because we thought he was going to be an angel in Palestine. We knew he was a staunch Zionist, but we voted for him because of issues here. I voted for him because one of my best friends is a DACA recipient, and I thought he would protect her and have better immigration policy. Because we always talk about how things shouldn't be a single vote issue, right? That's what democracy is. There's layers to this. But like Jinan said, we are putting cracks in the system. And the decolonization of Palestine also plays a role in the decolonization of the United States. And the way that our policy functions here. Because in being a partner of this genocide and the occupation of Palestine for the last 76 years, not just after October 7th, but for the last 76 years on every level, monetarily, politically, media-wise, the United States has single-handedly uplifted and enabled and played a partner in the occupation. And in doing so, it has also continued to harm our population here. The Israeli government, as we all know, has a role in how black and brown men are murdered in the streets here, right? In the way that the Israeli occupation force trains with American police and utilizes the same tactics that they use to kill Palestinian men in the West Bank, in Gaza, and East Jerusalem. It's the same thing. It's all interconnected. And so when we talk about all of these methods to decolonize Palestine, we as Americans here are not going to decolonize Palestine ourselves. We're not going to free Palestinians on the ground from the occupation. They're doing that for themselves. They're freeing themselves from the occupation. And we've seen that this entire year. There is nobody that would have been able to withstand the genocide in Gaza like the Palestinians in Gaza have been able to. There is no way they would have been able, I would have been able to stand that strong 417 days in with the life that they're living and everything that they're enduring on a daily basis. Palestinians in Palestine are freeing themselves. We are a tool to their decolonization, especially being in the United States. Prior to this session, there was somebody from Gaza that literally said, you have to know your role here. We are in a special position compared to the rest of the world. We're in the United States of America, again, single-handedly partnering with the occupation, with the apartheid system. There is no disconnecting ourselves. There is no becoming comfortable. You have to look at yourself, if you haven't already, and say, how am I contributing to this on a daily basis? Your entire existence within the United States is a resistance to the occupation. The way that you choose to spend your money, the way that you interact with elected officials, the conversations that you're having on a daily basis. 417 days into this genocide, the most well-documented genocide in history, in real time, there is no reason that Palestine and Gaza should not be coming up in our conversations on a daily basis. There is no reason that we are spending money and we're not thinking twice about where we're putting our money and where we're buying from. And there's absolutely no reason that we should be disengaging from the very system that continues to funnel the money that is uplifting apartheid Israel. There is no reason. And so our strategy has to be rooted in the understanding that change starts locally. You have to build from the ground up, and that's what we've seen. Chicago, Vermont, Minnesota, California, all of these places have been so incredibly politically powerful, and they serve as a representation of what should be happening on the congressional level. So your change starts locally. By mobilizing on the local level, you can create this ripple effect that supports the policy that we're trying to change on a federal level. For example, the success in Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, where the city council passed a resolution condemning Israel's apartheid practices and calling for an end to military aid. A city council called for an end to military aid. Would we have ever known that something like that was going to happen, that a random city in Vermont was going to call for the end of apartheid in Palestine? This is what you are building a map for the federal level. And so you need to continue building this power locally and using the stories of Palestinians on the ground to make the advocacy personal. Because like I said before, Palestine is no longer this foreign policy issue, this distant issue that Americans cannot connect with. It exists here too. It's interconnected with a lot of communities here too. So what we want to do is not stop raising awareness. Just because it feels like it's not working does not mean we give up. We are so incredibly privileged to be living in the United States. We don't get to become tired of speaking to our elected officials, of writing emails, of making calls, of knocking on their doors, of scheduling meetings. We don't get to do that when Palestinians on the ground are dodging bullets and bombs every single day and starving. We don't get to grow tired. We're living in the belly of the beast, and we are protected with our own privilege and our own rights. And so you sending an email every day and scheduling meetings with your elected officials to show them We are not going to become desensitized like we used to. We are not going to grow tired like we used to. We are going to sit in your face until you create the change that is necessary. And to prove, even though it's slow, it does work. If it didn't work, there wouldn't have been 17 senators that voted to not send aid to Israel. When the Senate does nothing, by the way. We know this. Senators don't do anything. That would have not been possible had it not been for advocates that would go to the Hill every single day since October 7th. It would not have been possible if it had not been for supporters of AMP and AGP Action that have sent out over 200,000 plus emails and calls over the last year. Because out of sight, out of mind, if we're not continuing to bother them, then they're going to forget about the issue. So the power exists within us. And we want to do 3 things. We want to push for local resolutions like the one that happened in Vermont and have it spread like a ripple effect across the country. We want to defund the occupation, and those local resolutions will help. It's a map reaching to that. So we need to continue calling for an arms embargo, demanding an arms embargo every day, every week, every month until they do it. Because there is no end to the genocide or the occupation until we stop funding the Israeli government. There is no end to it. And lastly, it's holding companies accountable. Political advocacy, activism, talking to our elected officials, so civil engagement, civic engagement, and boycotting all complement each other. There is no one without the other. There is no success without all 3 in this country. So you need to boycott, continue to protest, continue to talk about it, and continue to advocate for an end to military aid to the apartheid state of Israel. There is no other way. And again, you have to look at yourself every single morning in the mirror and say, what am I doing today as an American with the privilege that I have to help grant Palestinians the key to the end of their oppression, the end of apartheid, and the end of the colonization.
Thank you so much, Ayah. That was perfect. She basically gave you guys 3 things to do in, I think, the largest institution that we have in this country, which is the political system. But I do want to ask this last question to Dr. Osama, who can close the panel off, about another large institution that we have here in America, which I think is the religious institutions that we have. So Dr. Osama, what do you think, how do you think that faith leaders and religious institutions, what can they do to educate their congregations about the Palestinian struggle while fostering empathy and action?
Let me try to answer it this way. Let me ask a question here. Do you agree with me that we should be proud of Jinan, Ayah, Jenin, and their generation? Do you agree with me? Do you agree with me that, mashallah, we have raised a great generation that is going to be part of the movement that will liberate Palestine and will liberate America? You know, if it wasn't for our institutions, it wasn't for the Ammos and Khaltos who are sitting here, this generation would have not been at the helm of leadership today. صح؟ يعني بتمشوا لي إياها؟ Oh, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah, at least we agreed on something. Huh? And subhanallah, I'm always challenged by my youngest daughter, who's going to be upset now, that Baba, if they would give me the opportunity to speak, I would be more effective than you. Now I believe her. Now I believe her. You know, let me tell you this. To be crippled by our fear is going to take us nowhere and is going to ensure our destruction. That's one. Two, if we continue to forecast doomsday, we will live doomsday. If our leadership, our masajid, our institutions continue to try to inject this pessimism, I tell you we're going to accomplish nothing. We will reach a point in America where your hijab as a sister is going to be questioned and a right that is maybe taken away from you, like in France. If we continue to forecast failure, I promise you, one day in America, we wouldn't be able to go to our masajid. And we will be forced either to embrace assimilation in a way where we lose our identity, or we continue to stand up and fight for our rights. You have to choose. We have to choose. Many of us think that hope is only a matter of faith or an abstract concept. But what we don't understand is that hope is something that we construct and we realize. But you have to have the perseverance, the commitment, the determination, you have to strategize and you have to execute. But if we continue to invoke hope as a matter of faith only, which is a matter of faith, without acting on this faith, nothing is going to change. Let me remind you of Barack Obama when he came into presidency, when he promised a hope that we can believe in. He left without leaving hope behind, because he didn't act on it. He was crippled by, I don't know, maybe being an opportunistic, because based on his political calculations, I don't know if he was genuine from the beginning, but he left without leaving us with hope. Now, it is our choice. It is our choice. You know, I will give you an example here, just to understand how America works, where the few can lead and influence and manipulate the majority. When Obama became the president in 2009, he had a super majority in the Senate, with the exception of one single senator who gave him hell, Joe Lieberman. So he had 59 senators completely supportive of Obama's agenda in 2009 for 2 years. And he had a majority, a sizable majority in the House. At the time, if you remember, and this is something Democrats always talk about, stricter gun laws. We have an epidemic in America, mass shootings. So he wanted to address this issue. Democrats always claim that this is something that we want to tackle, and they accuse Republicans of not allowing more regulatory, more stricter gun laws to limit the type of magazines, these automatic or semi-automatic weapons. That's why we end up with mass shootings and we end up with mass casualties. So he had a supermajority, -1. Suddenly, later on, we learned that there is something called the nuclear option in the Senate, where you can just say, I don't need this supermajority, and there is nothing called filibuster, and we're just going to do it by 51 votes. So, he is president for 8 years, had a majority, enjoyed a supermajority in his first 2 years, but the Democrats changed nothing when it came to gun laws. Why? Oh, it wasn't only this. 79% of the American people were in favor of stricter gun laws. But nothing changed. 79%. That's an overwhelming majority, right? This should have drove change. But it didn't happen. So they wanted to analyze it. Let us understand why the 79%, with a supermajority in the Senate, with a sizable majority in the House, with a Democratic president in the White House, and with an evenly divided Supreme Court at the time, did not effect change. They said the overwhelming majority of the American people were less enthusiastic, less passionate. They didn't act on this conviction. They didn't hold their elected members, or the majority of them did not hold their elected members of Congress to where they stand on the issue of gun laws in America. So the members of Congress who are opportunistics as well, didn't feel compelled to vote their conscience or to vote based on what their base wants from them. While the minority, which don't constitute 21%, that is led by a powerful lobby, the NRA, dumped tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars every single election cycle to defeat members of Congress who are for stricter gun laws. So when the minority act, they manipulate and they can change and drive change. When the majority is silent and crippled by their fear or their pessimism, nothing changes. We all celebrate the steadfastness, the perseverance that we see emanating from Gaza, right? We all shed tears when we watch the news, like Jinan told us about Ghazala, or many other Hind and other kids. We all shed tears and we're all, depressed. But you know what? Our depression is going to do nothing to alleviate their suffering. Our dua and supplication to Allah without doing our part is going to change nothing. We learn in Islam, اعقلها وتوكل, right? Do your part and then place your trust in Allah. Not the other way around. We know the story of this Bedouin man who came to the masjid with his camel and he asked the Prophet, should I tie it? Should I tie the camel? The Prophet told him, اعقلها وتوكل, tie it and then you place your trust in Allah. It doesn't mean that you're coming to the masjid that Allah is going to protect it for you. It doesn't mean that we believe in Allah, that Allah will give us victory. Just go and read the story of Uhud, read the story of Hunayn, and you will know that Allah will not only grant us victory based on our faith. We have to do our part. That's when you rise up. That's when you build a movement. That's when you stand up to those bullies and oppressors, those who are coming after our organizations wants to shut us down, those who are trying. Jinan is a defendant, I'm a co-defendant. Because when I was listening to her talking about, leading protests and rallies, subhanallah, just 2 days ago, we were on a conference call because we're both co-defendants because she led one of these rallies or she was in one of these rallies, I don't know. But what this tells us, that they cannot win Jinan back. They cannot win back her generation. They cannot silence her. So they're trying what? To intimidate, to go after her, to drag her through the mud. That's what they're trying to do to AMP. Coming here on the plane today after I went through the extra check or the extra security because now I'm placed back on a watch list since May 2024 because I'm an activist for Palestine. And the federal agent who met me when I was coming from overseas, he didn't shy away from telling me how many individuals like you are featured on newspapers' front pages. How many people like you are targeted by congressional letters. How many people like you is being attacked and maligned every day, every week, every month. Because of my what? Activism for Palestine. Because I believe in my First Amendment. Now I have a choice. Either I retreat and lower my head, or I stand up and be proud of myself and make sure that my children are proud of me as we claim to be proud of our brothers and sisters in Gaza. We have to make a choice. We have to make a choice. Yes, do I like to go through this free massage when I travel? Do I like them crumbling my suit? No, I don't. But you know what? This country gives you the right to dissent. This country gives you the right to show them defiance. When I was coming, this TSA officer said, sit down. I said, I'm not sitting down, none of your business. We're not gonna sit down. And we're not going to retreat. And we're not going to give up. And we're not going to end our advocacy for Palestine. And we will continue to fight until our Congress is liberated and taken back by the people of America. At the end of the day, every one of us is an American citizen. If you understand what this means, the power you have as a citizen. When Jinan spoke about, and Ayah and everyone, when they spoke about Democrats losing the election, I'm not going to say solely because of us, but we contributed to this. Not only because Muslims did not vote with the same numbers for Kamala Harris as they voted for Biden, but if you look at those who are younger, 29 and younger, there was a sharp decline in terms of support for Harris as opposed to their support for Biden. And let us go back. Those who are under 30 are more sympathetic with whom? With Palestinians, right? So you have to factor in Palestine, although maybe we cannot quantify it now. But this does exist. Israel, not Israel now, let's put Israel aside. The Democratic Party will learn a lesson and they will be contemplating and they will be reflecting on this come the next elections. But you know how you make sure that they will understand the message and they will get the message? By being proactive. By being part of this movement. By understanding what it means to be an American. By being engaged. How many of you here voted? I'm not asking you to raise your hands. How many of you donated or contributed to political campaigns? When Jamal Bowman lost, how many Muslims in his district in the Bronx, New York, did not vote? When Cori Bush lost, how many of us contributed to her campaign? The two most expensive campaigns in the history of the United States for the House. Why? Because AIPAC and its likes dumped tens of billions of dollars to ensure their defeat because they're pro-Palestine. But when I tried to do a fundraiser for Jamal Bowman in Washington, D.C., and I texted many of my brothers and sisters who are sitting here, asking them to donate for his campaign, we were only able to raise $22,000. While AIPAC dumped $25 million against him. Subhanallah. When we send hundreds of millions of dollars in relief assistance, which we should continue overseas, let us think about investing some of this money here in America. You want to be effective, you want to have members of Congress who are more supportive of you, we have to understand that there are rules to this game. We can't continue to send our money overseas and expect that we're doing the right thing. We should continue, but it should be proportional. Let us understand when Donald Trump became the president, with a stroke of a pen, he ended UNRWA's funding for about $64 million. How much do we send a year to Gaza or to Palestine? I'm finishing, inshallah. With a stroke of a pen. Imagine that we had the political power in America here to have a counter pressure. Now we see America is so divided. We no longer have landslide victories. It's by small margins. Our numbers matter. Our awareness matter because it's not only Muslims, minorities, you have to look how they voted and what Palestine meant to them and what the genocide in Gaza meant to them. Younger Americans, progressives, others who feel disenfranchised within the Democratic Party. We have to factor all of this in. And then we will understand the power that we have. Yes, Trump is coming. So we're being promised what? Doomsday. Oh, Trump is coming. He's coming after AMP. He's coming after other organizations. I don't want to mention other organizations just out of respect. So he's coming after all of you. So what do we do? Screw Donald Trump? I mean, this is America. Either you bow down or you stand up. Choose. Bow down and they will walk all over you. Stand up, you will pay a price. But it's a less price than bowing down. We have to learn from, if we continue to celebrate the resilience of Gaza, be as resilient as them here. Don't be intimidated by the likes of ADL that today launched an attack on AMP, or the likes of AIPAC, or the likes of AGC, or the likes of the Jewish Federation, or the likes of I don't know what other white supremacist, hateful, bigoted Zionist organizations that are going after us. Don't be deterred, because once you are deterred, you have set the tone for your defeat. And we would never be defeated, because we represent consciousness and the conscience of America, and we will be victorious, inshallah. It doesn't matter if Osama pays a price. What matters is that this trajectory is going to continue upward. It's not going downward. We're not going to abandon our oppressed brothers and sisters, and we're not going to abandon the oppressed in America here, and we will not allow anyone to marginalize us, because once we accept that, we are gone. Our religious institutions, our masajid need to understand that open your doors for organizations like CARE, like MLFA, like AMP, like these organizations, because if you don't open your doors, you are weakening the only shield that stands between you and between the bigoted who wants to shut you down and walk all over you. Jazakumullah khair.